Hello and welcome to another edition of D&D Stories. I am your host Rob from the channel Performance Check, and this is the show where I regale you with tales about the time when something cool happened within the hit role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons, and sometimes Pathfinder. This is the concluding chapter of this particular story arc, the 8th Gate. This is when all hell breaks loose. Previously, Valdane the Sorcerer and Barnaby the Hexblade of questionable skill, along with his handy familiar Python Cedric, have delved deep beneath the keep of Agistel to seek out the 8th Gate, a gate that leads to the 8th Circle of Hell, the domain of Mephistopheles himself. After 3 magical trials, Valdane and Barnaby find themselves standing before the 8th Gate, and it is only then that Datsner, a rival to Valdane, a sorcerer, revealed himself once again, simply showing that he had wanted Valdane and Barnaby to do all the hard work, and so he could reach the gate himself unscathed and unspent of spell slots. And now, as we return to our heroes, we're going to discover the very lengths that Datsner will go to ensure he can harness the power of Carnia, the 8th Circle, and what he will do and what he will sacrifice to gain the favour of Mephistopheles. This is the 8th Gate, Part 4. Datsner begins walking towards our pair of adventurers, his hands wide open with a beaming shit-eating grin upon his face. And he says, "My dear friends, step aside. The outcome of this day is inevitable." He barely finishes his sentence before Valdane hurls a flaming sphere at his rival. It burns like a flaming ball towards Datsner, and panic suddenly fills his face, and he has to hurl himself sideways to not be incinerated by the blast. Barnaby draws his blade and charges, but he doesn't reach him in time. Datsner rises up from the ground and sends forth a blast of some strange-looking magic that both Valdane and Barnaby have never seen before. This is wild magic, and Mike, who is DMing, explains to us that wild magic has some unpredictable outcomes and unpredictable effects. This spell hits Barnaby directly in the chest. Barnaby staggers back, collapsing onto the ground, and it would seem that his skin, his flesh, is roiling about and making strange shapes. He begins to bulge and swell. Valdane looks at his companion in horror as Barnaby proceeds to put on at least 18 stone. Datsner lets out a high-pitched laughter that rings through this echoing hall of darkness upon this gantry that they stand upon. Barnaby has become Barnabelly. There is a pause in gameplay at this point, as all of us around the table just lose it completely. Myself and Mike are pissing ourselves with laughter. It is a random effect. Wild Magic has like a D100 roll table, even back in the day, and randomly it rolled up as being you put on an immense amount of weight. Barnaby essentially now has a swollen, massive gut, which is really accentuated by his costume. I think I might have gone into what Barnaby wears usually. He has sort of like this long flowing coat, but he has like a bare chest beneath it. So now you can see his swollen gut just protruding out of this adventurer's long coat. We're losing it with laughter, apart from Matt, who I'm afraid to say is a little bit sensitive about his weight. And we're not usually horrible about it, but it just transpired that this had happened, and Matt wasn't particularly happy. He says, "For fuck's sake, I can't be dealing with this." And we're like, oh man, like that's really unfortunate. And he's like, I play D&D to escape the woes of my real life, and now you've made me obese in game. And we have to take a little bit of a moment. This dramatic confrontation between Valdane and his rival has just been punctured. All the tension has been punctured by the fact that this rather hilarious thing has befallen Barnaby. But despite that, we collect ourselves and we say, look, let's just play this out and see what happens. Barnaby has been given some negative modifiers onto some of his rolls now, and some of his movement speed. What has transpired is really rather fitting, because Datsner at heart is a trickster, and he likes to mess with people. He likes to screw around, and the fact of the matter is, he's messed with Barnaby, who now roars with rage. Taking up his Hexblade's blade, he takes a violent, waddling step at Datsner, and he brings his blade down upon the sorcerer, who is so beset with laughter he is unable to defend himself properly. Barnaby calls upon the Hexblade's curse, and the energy is coated his weapon as he brings it across Datsner's chest. The laughter stops immediately, the sorcerer staggering back, looking down at blood pouring from his robes, and he fails to save. Datsner is one of the few enemies who have succumbed to the Hexblade's curse. He now has a -2 on all ability checks, all skill checks, and all saves. And with a violent roar of disapproval, he raises his hands and claps, and as he does, shimmering energy pours out from him to form a number of mirror images of himself. He casts mirror image. Now, standing before them are 5 versions of Datsner. And these 5 versions of Datsner, all of them, proceed to just sprint as fast as they can towards the gate. Valdane realizes that he has a low-level spell solution for this. He reaches forth and fires magic missiles at all of the mirror images of Datsner, and all of them dissipate but one. Datsner is still belting his way towards the gate. Valdane is able to quicken Eagle's Splendor, giving himself a bonus to his charisma, making his spells more powerful, but that's his turn. Barnaby takes a wild dive at Datsner and is able to grab hold of the sorcerer. The two are struggling upon the very edge of the gantry above Oblivion. Now grappled, Barnaby is able to use the rest of his attacks to bludgeon Datsner twice in the head. Just bam, bam, 2 unarmed attacks. The sorcerer tries to wriggle free from the Hexblade's grasp, but needs a little magical bonus to help him achieve this. So he is able to automatically deal a touch spell as he is in a grapple. Datsner is able to channel a touch of fatigue into Barnabelly, and the poor Hexblade, his grasp withers at the impact of the spell, and Datsner is able to wriggle free and uses his movement to close in on the gate. Turning, he is able to quicken some magic missiles towards Valdane, and they strike him hard in the chest. Valdane at this point has had enough. He reaches forth towards Datsner as he closes the last remaining steps towards the gate. He reaches forth and seizes Datsner in a telekinetic grasp and hurls him as high as he can into the air. Valdane watches his rival spin up higher and higher and higher until he reaches the zenith of this leap into the air, and he raises a hand, channeling lightning through his body. Valdane is able to quicken a lightning bolt that strikes Datsner as he is in midair. The entire chamber is just lit up with this blue neon light as the sorcerer above is just electrocuted violently, then falls tumbling back towards the ground and lands painfully, bam, just on the very edge of the gantry. Datsnare slowly looks up from the ground. Blood is just pouring freely from his mouth, clearly suffering from the impact of such a violent fall. And his eyes meet Valdane's, and he gives out a low, dangerous laugh. Valdane looks on in horror as Datsnare upon the ground appears to unravel into rubbery sheets of fabric that seem to disintegrate into the air. In horror, Valdane looks towards the gate. Datsnare is standing there. The trickster sorcerer had cast Fetch and then instantly turned invisible, meaning that Valdane had channeled all of that power, all of that damage, into a fake version of Datsnare. The real sorcerer now standing by the 8th gate and reaching his arm into the portal. Barnaby had used all of his, well, not all of his movement, because he's lost some because of his, weight problem. So he had basically run to where Datsnare had fallen, and seeing the deception, he is able to seize 2 daggers and just hurl them through the air towards Datsnare. One connects, one misses, and just goes straight through the portal and appears to disintegrate upon impact. But the dagger that sinks into Datsnare's flesh barely seems to faze him. This strange look comes over his eyes as he reaches into the portal. Frost immediately begins to coat Datsnare's flesh. His eyes, that strange look, is gifted to him by the fact that they have begun to become purely ice blue. And when he opens his mouth, he speaks with a different voice.
Finally, my time has come.
Valdane and Barnaby stand and watch in horror as Datsnare appears to transform. He begins to grow far more muscular. He appears to have this blue hue of energy surrounding him. Large, horned icicles begin to form at the sides of his head, and his breath escapes him with a frosty hue. Valdane takes a stride forward, casting mage armor as he does so, and he states, Datsnare, or should I say, Mephistopheles, your invasion stops here. The archdevil gives a long, evil laugh.
Sorcerer, my intentions have never been to invade this backwater realm. I merely wish for my avatar to walk freely and to sow wrath and destruction in my name.
So this, retorts Barnaby with a reply that really doesn't make an awful lot of sense. Despite this, the Hexblade charges at the newly transformed Datsnare, who has now become the host of Mephistopheles' avatar in Main Realm. A avatar that we have come to know as Mephistopheles. Barnaby reaches Mephistopheles and he swings violently with his blade, once, twice, striking this terrifying foe. And then Matt has an idea. He says, why the hell? We need to use our familiars more. I'm going to get Cedric to attack as well. So Cedric, the snake, enters the initiative order and makes a snake-like lunge towards Mephistopheles. A simple python against a avatar of a Lord of Hell. The snake lands at Mephistopheles' feet, and the archdevil just sort of beholds this creature, gives a terrifying smile, and brings his foot down hard upon Cedric, flattening him in the middle. The pressure alone is enough to burst the snake open. "No!" screams Barnaby. Valdane is firing as many spells as he can towards Mephistopheles. Barnaby is just swinging his sword left and right, but this foe is incredibly powerful. And it reaches back into the portal. And as its hand returns to this plane of reality, in its grasp it bears a staff that appears to be forged from metal and living ice.
"Behold, I bear a powerful weapon, and I shall use it to strike you down."
It is at this point that Mike requests that we both make a Knowledge Arcana roll, and this request is troubling. Surely there can't be more to this horrendous situation. But indeed there is. On a successful roll from both of the adventurers, we learn that the staff that Mephistopheles now bears is known as the Power Word Staff. In a horrifying mix of powerful hellish magic and the random effects of Datsnare's skills, we learn that the Power Word Staff is a magical item that randomly cycles through all of the Power Word spells that can be found within the Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 books. Any Power Word spell that you can think of exists within the power of this staff. And as Mephistopheles points this at our heroes, Mike rolls randomly to see which Power Word spell erupts from it first. This is a terrifying weapon, and now our adventurers are going to suffer at the brunt of such a powerful object. What makes matters even worse is that Mike the DM is deciding to ask us for our saves before declaring which spell he is using, which I think is a little underhanded, but it upped the stakes and it made us even more terrified for this powerful foe with this powerful item. He asks for Barnaby to make a fortitude save, and he fails. As the staff is pointed at him, Power Word Pain erupts across the Hexblade. Barnaby gives a shriek as every fibre of his being feels like it is on fire and being stabbed with shards of glass at the same time. The Hexblade reels him out, collapsing to the ground. The spell essentially maintains until the save is made. Barnaby is now incapacitated until he accomplishes this. This is horrifying. This is almost too much. We've been in over our heads before in these campaigns. We've been up against terrifying foes with immense HP and immense attack bonuses and immense spell-like abilities, but never have we faced an avatar of an archdevil with an obscenely powerful weapon of this kind. Valdane looks in horror as Barnaby is clutching at himself and at his belly as he rolls around on the ground. And Valdane makes a desperate attempt to try and attack the staff. And he sends out a blast of scorching rays. And he's able to connect, but the archdevil seems to have spell resistance as well, which is a nightmare, an absolute nightmare to deal with when you're a magical class, as I'm sure many of you watching know. Valdane's going to need more firepower as his spells, while slightly effective, don't do an awful lot. Thankfully, it comes round to Barnaby's turn, and he is able to make the save the first time. Shaking his head, the Hexblade struggles to his feet, watching as Valdane is desperately trying to hold back Mephistopheles with these spells. The Hexblade seizes his weapon and drives it deep into the thigh of Mephistopheles, and the Archdevil looks at the blade in his leg, looks directly at Barnaby, and gives another terrifying laugh, and then points the staff at Valdane. "Make a fortitude save, please," says Mike from over his DM screen at me, and I'm just looking at him and I hate him. I hate him because this could be anything. This power word spell could be power word kill. If I fail the save, Valdane's done. So I make the fortitude save, not knowing what I'm trying to save against. And the die comes up as a 1. I roll a critical fail. I watch as an evil smile spreads across Mike's face, and Valdane watches as an evil smile spreads across Mephistopheles' face. And that is the last thing that Valdane sees. Power word blind is now in effect. Valdane, in horror, staggers back as his vision fades into darkness. The sorcerer has been blinded by the power word staff, and I am horrified. As a player character, I am horrified. My favourite character I've ever played in D&D is now a sitting duck in this fight. He can't see. And I have to wait an entire round in which to try and solve this issue, because there's no way Valdane's going to escape the power of this terrifying archdevil without being able to see. It is Valdane's turn next, and I roll to see if I can make the save. Every time it comes to your turn, every time in the round, beginning of your turn, you can make a save to see if you can overcome the effects of the spell. And Valdane fails the roll abysmally. Another horrifying laugh comes from Mephistopheles. And then a smile comes across Valdane's face. Mephistopheles feels doubt for the first time in this encounter as he beholds Valdane standing very still and concentrating. You may recall, dear viewers, that from the previous encounters involving the magical trials, Valdane had one spell left that could help him in this particular eventuality. Valdane casts True Seeing. And the description states that you can see everything as they are. And looking through the arcane eye, Valdane can behold the magical power of Mephistopheles standing in front of him. Meanwhile, Barnaby is taking another strike. He hacks again and again at Mephistopheles, bringing that Hexblade's blade against the Archdevil. Once, twice. And finally, Mephistopheles has had enough. Looking down upon the Hexblade, he reaches down with a taloned hand, and he seizes Barnaby by the throat and lifts him into the air. And he says, "Enough!" And he hurls the Hexblade as hard as he can back across the gantry. Barnaby hits the ground, slides, and tumbles over the edge. Matt is asked to make a reflex save to see if Barnaby can clasp onto the edge as he falls over. Meanwhile, still perceiving the world around him with true sight, perceiving the battlefield before him, Valdane looks at the magical energy signatures that are before him. He sees Barnaby fly through the air and tumble over the edge, just managing to hang on, succeeding the save. And he perceives the power of Mephistopheles, and he knows that something special is going to have to be pulled out of the bag to bring this guy down. And he also perceives the power of the 8th gate that stands behind this terrible foe. And he has an idea. Marching forth, Valdane prepares to cast his most powerful spell, a new spell, one that he has been saving for this very occasion, the boss battle. And reaching out with a pointed finger, he fires a blast, in fact a beam of bright yellow energy. It fires in a direct line towards Mephistopheles and passes by him. Mephistopheles looks and watches it go by, and as he returns his gaze to Valdane, he has a smile painted across his devilish face, and he laughs and he says,
"If that was your best shot, you are truly doomed."
Valdane just stares blindly, Mephistopheles believes, and then gives a smile, glancing behind him. Mephistopheles looks back again and sees that Valdane has cast Disintegrate. And one of the pillars that holds up the integrity of the gate, the integrity of the portal, has indeed been disintegrated. There is a blast of energy as dimensional powers ripple about them. The force of this gate imploding causes everything nearby to be dragged towards it, being pulled in to the 8th circle of hell. The wind that billows around them is icy cold, and Mephistopheles gives a terrifying roar of rage. His entryway into this world has been compromised, and it is now dragging him back to the pit from whence he came. Sadly though, this means that our heroes are also being dragged across the gantry towards a fate worse than death. As this connection between this reality and the reality of the 8th circle is compromised, so too is the connection between Mephistopheles and Datsner. The avatar of this archdevil is being dragged towards the portal. The great beast is now clutching onto the sides of the portal to try and ensure he isn't dragged back inside. Watching in horror, Valdane and Barnaby, who remember is still clutching onto the edges. Valdane is sort of scrambling, trying to find like a handhold somewhere. And they watch and they see that Datsner, his entity, is pulled from the avatar. It's almost like he's blinking awake for a moment, Datsner, before he realizes fully what has happened. And in dismay, he gives one last terrified look at Valdane, his old rival, his friend from long ago that he had betrayed, and he opens his mouth as if to speak, but he is dragged backwards into the 8th circle of hell. The wind that whistles about them is deafening. Valdane and Barnaby are clutching on for dear life, and it seems so is the remaining shell of this Archon, this avatar of Mephistopheles. And then suddenly, everything goes quiet. It's almost as if time itself has paused. In the darkness of Valdane's mind, for still he can't see, he can only really see sort of like the magical shapes around him and things like that. He hears a voice that is similar but less bestial to the one that he's heard from this terrifying figure from before. And it says simply, "Sorcerer, it seems I chose the wrong champion to inhabit. You may have delayed my plans to have an avatar of my own creation walk upon this main realm. but it is an inevitability. It will happen. Valdane is still upon the ground, clutching at the edges of the gantry, despite the fact that the billowing winds of the dimensional energy has paused. And he doesn't say anything. The voice of Mephistopheles continues. You may have gained victory this day, but behold all that you will lose in the days to come. Suddenly, Valdane's psyche is bombarded with visions. Visions of the past and the future. Valdane sees Droskor, Hammerstone of the Undercroft, the dwarven fighter, battling against the Red Talon clan, the adversaries that had killed his brothers-in-arms long ago. Valdane sees Theodrex of Hemlon, the ranger, amid slaughter and ruin of his entire ranging party. He then sees a great beast, a werewolf, tearing apart townsfolk and the town militia alike. Valdane sees a strange place he has not visited yet. It is known as the Undercroft, and it is the kingdom of the dwarves to the north in the realm known as Nurendel. And it lies silent, like a crypt, like a tomb. He then beholds a vast mountain with lightning arcing atop its peak, and a great shadow falling across it. The shadow of a minotaur, with boiling hot steam exuding from its nostrils as it begins to charge. And then, in an almost impossible feat, it is as if Valdane can see all of Main Realm, and he can see a shadow moving across its land, eclipsing the world. Then suddenly it is as if Valdane is returned to reality. Still blind, he can hear the voice of Mephistopheles echoing in his ears. As you can see, there are terrible times that have yet to come to pass. And victory can only be attained if you are accompanied by your friends that now reside within the 9 circles of hell. Did you really think that they would be going anywhere else? Valdane is desperately trying to struggle to his feet. If you agree to my terms, I can return them to you. I can return them to life. I can return them to Main Realm. But in return, you must agree to be my champion in the days to come when I ask for it. And that is where we're going to leave this particular edition of D&D Stories. This is a slightly shorter episode because I wanted to dedicate the ending part of this tale to the boss fight upon the gantry. It was one of the most high-stakes battles we've had in the game, mainly because of the power word staff, and also because of the climactic choice at the very end. Will Valdane choose to become a champion, or at least a future champion of Mephistopheles, and in return Droskor and Theodrex to Main Realm? Well, you're just going to have to find out in the future, because we won't be returning to this story. That's the end of that story. We will see the continuation of the saga, and hopefully then you will discover what truly occurred at the end of that battle upon the gantry and how it will affect the outcome of the future. For now, thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. And until next time, remember, keep gaming.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out the D&D Stories Facebook, Patreon, and t-shirts on Redbubble. Keep gaming!